Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Today we are joined by our guest, Brian Gottlieb. He is a Harvard Business School alum, a visionary founder and CEO who transformed a modest $3,000 startup into a thriving multi-state group of companies valued at nearly $200 million. So Brian has led his companies to the Inc. 5000 list for 4 consecutive years and earned recognition as Wisconsin's best workplace. He's passionate about helping businesses and being a grower of people. So I love that phrase. He serves as an angel investor, board member, and a sought-after keynote speaker. And Brian's new book is titled Beyond the Hammer, A Fresh Approach to Leadership, Culture, and Building High-Performance Teams. So Brian, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Mark, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. We're going to have some fun today.
I think we are. Fun question. Forgive the joke. I'm going to say Beyond the Hammer. The book it's not a reference to MC Hammer.
It's not, but maybe that'll be my next book.
Michael Hammer might have been a better business reference when we're talking about authors. I'm pretty sure I know what you mean by getting beyond the hammer and how that helps build a great workplace. So I am excited to hear more about that. But as we always do here, Brian, first things first, my favorite question, what would you say is your favorite mistake?
It's really interesting, Mark, and thanks for the question. Yeah. It was beyond my favorite mistake. It was a lingering regret that stayed with me for over 40 years. So like many people in this world, school was never my thing. When I got out of school, I didn't go to college. I went right into the workforce and sold pots and pans and sold home improvement projects, did all sorts of things. For many, many, many years, I regretted that decision of not going to school. In fact, there was a time when after I had a consulting business, I wanted to come off of the road and I started applying at certain businesses. And because I didn't have a certain level of education, I didn't get a chance. I wasn't hired. Once again, a mistake that I continued to regret for 40 plus years. That mistake led me to the point that, well, if I can't get this job or that job or another job, you know what? Maybe I'm just going to start my own business. Ended up, had I gone to school, my life would have gone down a very, very different path. Having not gone to school was really the thing that made me decide to open up my own business. And 2 years ago, I sold that business for generational wealth, something I probably wouldn't have accomplished had I gone to college. It's just interesting.
Yeah, and that's something that would be hard to accomplish as an employee, as opposed to being a founder and an entrepreneur and helping a business thrive.
Yeah, what I did learn about that journey, though, is because when I was about 54 years old and the business I had probably 40, 50 employees. We were doing maybe at the time $30 or $40 million. I realized I've never done this before. I don't know how to run a $30 or $40 million business. So I heard about this executive education program at Harvard Business School. And I applied, not even thinking they would accept me, mind you, but they did. Yeah. And I was super excited and absolutely petrified at the same time, because again, I think about how I didn't do well on tests and school wasn't my thing. Yeah. But I got through the classes. It was really wonderful. I really performed well. And I learned through that process that it's a very blurry line between that which is a weakness and that which we're simply afraid of. I viewed my lack of doing well in school as a weakness. What I learned as I got older, you know what? It was just a fear and I needed to walk through it. And you know what? We're not the same person we are when we're 18. Go figure. So.
Yeah. And so that school experience, that formal education experience was not a mistake, it seems.
That was not a mistake. That actually really helped me be a more intentional leader for my team, and it really helped transform the business and really grow it.
Yeah. And what was that first business that you started? I'm not sure what the exact businesses were. Yeah.
So I opened up my first home improvement company in 2009 in the back of a friend's warehouse on a plastic folding table with $3,000 in cash. And that's how the business started. And it was primarily a sunroom company. We were doing sunroom additions and such. over the following years, we added products like bath remodeling and replacement windows and exterior things like decks, and we did some kitchen refacing, and opened up in multiple states with multiple different business units and product lines. And yeah, when I sold the business, we actually had we're up to 600 employees and $150 million in yearly revenue. So the business was quite successful, and we had a great team.
But starting a business, there's just a lot of practical and technical details of how or when do you even need to incorporate, or you just start off as a sole proprietorship, and how do you pay yourself, or how do you pay somebody else? Or I mean, what was your informal real life education? Was it a matter of learning through experience, hiring people that could show you those details?
My informal education, which I kept a journal, and during my consulting days, I got to visit with a lot of companies across the country. And I kept this journal, and I kept 2 columns on each page. And the columns were, on one side, if I ever start a business, I'm definitely doing these things. And the other side was, if I ever start a business, I'm never doing these things. Because I got to see a lot of businesses, and especially when 2008 hit, where a lot of businesses were going out of business. It was almost like a PhD in business, having that experience. So I did take those things and apply the best of what I've seen out there into the business. Early on, I wanted to create more than just a company. I really wanted to build a business that was woven into the fabric of the communities that we served. I wanted to give people more than just a job. I wanted to give them a mission. And that was at the core of everything we did.
And I mean, I'm going to say this as somebody with an MBA on the wall, in addition to an engineering degree where there were some business topics. I don't know if business schools are really teaching people to focus on growing people and being good members of the community. There are many valuable things being taught there, but I mean, in some ways you weren't biased by I'm going to stereotype, but from business school experience, there's just so much focus on finance and buying and selling companies, and maybe not really relating to employees in a way that would actually be better.
I agree with you, Mark. And if we do think back to 2008, we probably all know people that lost their jobs during those times, and that. Watching people that really cared about their job and then not having one anymore, that really set the course for me wanting to create a different type of business. And so a lot of it was about the environment also that really set the groundwork for success. But look, we all know in the early stages of business, the first rule of business is just simply to stay in business. And so, but at some point you have to hire people and build teams and create alignment and do all those sort of things if you really want to grow.
Yeah. And there's a lot of businesses that might not garner all the headlines. I mean, there's so much focus on tech entrepreneurs,
right?
And that's great. There's in tech circles, so many stories of the Bill Gateses, Mark Zuckerbergs, people who dropped out of college because they started a business, and there's almost this maybe overreaction to some people saying, well, okay, we'll see, the college degree is not important. Some high profile entrepreneurs have literally offered some $100,000 to a college kid to quit school because they had quit school, and we're going to pay you to, we're going to help you start a business instead. I'm curious your reaction to that type of thing.
Well, look, I think that if we were to study all the successful entrepreneurs, whether it's those that went to school or dropped out of school, I think the one thing they all share is a learning mindset. And I think what school does do is it helps you to exercise the muscle of learning. And that's really, and I didn't realize that until some many years later. But if we exercise as leaders of a business, if we exercise the muscle of learning and keep a learning mindset and instill a learning mindset in those on our team, you know what, we're going to grow a great business. And especially when you think about, as I was saying earlier, in the early days of starting a business, this is about staying in business. And when the entrepreneur is the sole employee, the business's success is based on how well the entrepreneur executes.
Mhm.
But when we start hiring people, well, now the business's success is based on how well our teams perform, both when the leader's watching and when they're not. So,
Yeah.
getting the right mindset down for the people on your team is really, really crucial.
Yeah. And that idea of not just surviving but thriving requires a different approach, including developing people, and thinking about culture. I mean, there's so much to think about, and I know some companies that are very successful, not just because they have a great idea, great technology, focus on a customer, they also focus on culture. And I think from the early stages of, like, not just thinking what markets are we going to go into, but also thinking about what culture do we want to create. Some people don't do that.
Yeah, it's true. So we had a saying in our business that, look, if you really want to copy our performance, you first have to copy our culture and what goes
Mhm.
on inside of our people's heads, because
Mhm.
that's the most difficult thing to replicate. When we
Right.
talk about the
Right.
title of the book, Beyond the Hammer, the concept of that was it's a story about this contractor that's swinging a hammer. And to
Mhm.
build a business, you really have to get beyond the hammer and build the people inside of the business. If you want to build a business, you have to
Mhm.
commit to building people. And whether you're in the construction business or there's so many different businesses where I think the owner is so busy inside of the business that it's hard to kind of zoom out and really say, how do we build the people so that we can really build a business?
Yeah.
How do we get beyond the hammer?
Yeah. And I think there's at least in my mind, thinking of some of my experiences and scars, a different meaning of the hammer is, managers or executives who, quote unquote, bring the hammer down on people
Correct.
when they've
Correct.
made a mistake, or when there's performance issues. So to me, that's the other thing that comes to mind. What do you think?
It's a great analogy, right? And typically, if you think about, you've got the leader, you've got the manager, and then you've got the hammer, right? You've got the boss with a hammer, and that's a tough environment where anybody is ever really going to be successful. One of the things I do write
Yeah.
about in the book is that 60% of people have in the United States have left a job simply to get away from a manager. That's an
Right.
alarming statistic. And we all know somebody that's probably miserable at their work, and it doesn't need to be like that. The good news is it creates a massive competitive edge for the
Mhm.
leader that says that's not okay. We're going to grow people. We're going to create
Yeah.
opportunity here. As I was saying earlier, we're not going to give people a job. We're going to give them a mission. And when you do
Yeah.
that, you could really grow one heck of a business.
Yeah. And I think growing people requires a founder or a leader to take what might seem like a risk of giving up some control, of literally, maybe in your home improvement business, of literally handing a hammer to somebody else and saying, okay, I'm not swinging the hammer anymore, but I'm trying to hire great people and find customers and put them in a position where they can go do good things with those hammers, and we all win. Right.
Mark, that's absolutely correct. Yes, we need to hire to our weaknesses, right? We know that. But we also have to replicate our strengths as quick as
Mhm.
possible too,
Mhm.
because otherwise
Mhm.
we're going to be otherwise we will be the lid of the business. So how do we empower others? Going back to that hammer philosophy of the difficult boss.
Yeah.
I guess business owners have a choice. Do they want to create a business that's driven by policy where mistakes are punished, or do you want a business that's based on empowerment, recognizing that it's indecision that's frowned upon, not mistakes, and
Mhm.
everything becomes a training opportunity? If I can
Yeah.
share with you, when I first started my construction business, if you'd have asked me what business I was in, I would have said, well, we're in the construction business. If you'd
Yeah.
have asked me, maybe, I don't know, when I had probably 30 sales reps and a couple hundred employees, if you asked me what kind of business we were in, I would have said, well, we're a sales and marketing company that happens to be in home improvements.
Mhm.
But it wasn't until we didn't start to really grow until we changed our mindset and said, what business we really are? We're a training organization. We,
Oh,
we
wow.
develop people. That's what we have to do. We have to be in
Mhm.
the business of
Mhm.
developing talent. And that was transformational, not just for myself, but for the team as well.
Yeah. Well, and that makes me think of, a company that, a lot of people admire and try to emulate or copy. And like you said, copying culture and mindsets is probably the hardest thing. But Toyota. Toyota Motor talks a lot in very specific language of saying, we are a people development company. They'll use expressions that I think would resonate with you of, we're building people before building cars. And obviously, growing and developing people is admirable in and of itself, but it's also a means to the end, meaning satisfying customers and growing a business.
Yeah, that's a great. There's a section in my book that talks about Toyota specifically, because one of their tools of empowerment is something known as the andon cord.
Yeah.
And an andon cord, as you know, right, sits at every single station in the manufacturing line, and everybody's not told to, but empowered to pull that cord if there's a problem, and then they're actively involved in finding the root cause of it.
Right.
Toyota's a great example of building people.
Yeah. Well, and I think in a positive way, I mean, I know you're saying like they're not told, they're not forced to. There's this expectation that the way I've learned it from Toyota people is, if you see a problem, pull the cord. If in doubt, pull the cord. Like if you think
that's right,
maybe there's possibly a problem, pull the cord. But then that's positively reinforced by a team leader coming and trying to help instead of some companies, people would get yelled at for potentially stopping the line if that's the primary focus, as opposed to quality and solving problems. And while we keep Toyota up on this pedestal, but they really talk about the emphasis, as a leader. If you know the answer to a problem and you give it to your employees, you're robbing them of an opportunity to learn and grow.
That's right.
And I think that's really powerful.
That's right, and potentially coming up with even a better solution.
That too.
What happens is, as an organization grows, as I'm sure you know, the CEO and the leadership team get further and further away from the customer as layers of the org chart get filled in. And decisions aren't always the best decisions when they're made in an ivory tower. Right. There's a saying, the shepherd should smell like the sheep. And people closest to the product or the customer are the ones that are going to probably come up with a really, really good answer to any given problem.
Yeah. And so like letting go of controlling the hammer, letting go of, I know leaders struggle with this, of feeling like, well, I'm the leader, I'm the owner, I need to have all the answers. Or it's like, if I don't have the answers, I'm failing my employees. Well, you could flip that and say, well, if you're always giving people the answers, maybe you're failing them in a different way. Yeah.
Should the leader have all the answers, or should they really know the right questions to ask? Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting perspective.
And you ask that as a question.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone can answer that their own way, but I think I'm curious in your study of Toyota and thinking about your own businesses, some of that distinction is, do I give them the answer because it'd be faster? Or do I let them struggle a little bit and, like you said, maybe solve it, maybe come up with something better? It's a matter of long-term versus short-term perspective. So there's a book called The Toyota Way. Professor Jeff Leiker from University of Michigan, spells out, here's 14 principles of Toyota. Principle number 1 is about making decisions based on the long term, even at the expense of the short term. And a lot of these companies that would say, oh, we want to copy Toyota, they won't copy the long-term thinking idea.
Well, and I think, and by the way, I understand that. Okay. I understand the idea that I'm starting a business. I've got my world on the line because it's my business, and the cash in the business, there's not a lot to replace it if things don't go wrong. And the natural tendency is to want to micromanage every single decision along the way. But in doing so, really nobody grows. And at some point, you have to create an environment where people are allowed to kind of, I think about it this way. My role as a leader, if I take my kids bowling when they were little, right? You take them to the bowling alley and they have these gates that go up in the gutters, right? That stops the ball from going in the gutter, but the ball can go as crazy as it wants in between those gutters. That's kind of my role, right? How do I provide these gutter guards, but allow them to have the freedom to find their way? And I think that's an okay balance on how do you get from feeling like you have to micromanage to starting the process of empowerment.
Yeah. And think of literal guardrails on a windy mountain road The guardrail maybe, mitigates the mistake of driving poorly, and crashing into a guardrail is better than going off the edge
That's
of
right.
a mountain.
That's
I
right.
mean, and, you don't want to smash your car into the
Yeah. It's still
guardrail
not a pleasant experience, but
but then hopefully, let's see if this analogy still, if I can keep the analogy making sense, but hopefully the first time you hit the guardrail, or better yet, the first time you almost hit the guardrail because you hit that rumble strip in the shoulder, and you
yes,
realize, oh no, I'm heading for the guardrail. That's even better. Then
that's
you
right.
adjust
Yeah. Yeah.
and learn not to crash.
Mark, I think it's a great analogy. I think there's probably another book in there somewhere with it.
Maybe. No, I was just thinking of something silly I did the other day. I was sitting at a red light waiting for it to turn green. I was the second person, and the car in front of me started going, and they were about to turn left. And sure, some pickup truck came flying through, really running that red light. And I saw it, and I'm like, is that about to be a collision? Well, I slammed on my horn. I don't know what kind of reflex that was. And thankfully the car stopped in time, and the pickup truck went around it. And I think, boy, there was a close call. I don't think my horn honking was going to wait. I don't know, but it was this reflex. So I don't know why that story popped into mind, but I think, sometimes as a leader, there's this question of this is why it came to mind of where do we call out the risk versus when do we let things play out? When do you let someone hit the guardrail, and when do you need to keep them away from danger?
Well, taking what you just said and backing up to something we chatted about a moment ago is asking the right questions, right? Because what we have to do if we're going to be a training organization, if we're going to empower people, we actually have to help them. We have to teach them how to make decisions, right? We have to teach them how to go through, going back to Toyota, their 5 whys. So, how do you get to the root cause? How are you not focusing on symptoms, but really addressing the problems? But these are all things that we need to develop people for. A lot of folks that work in a business have never been asked to rise to that level of accountability and responsibility and decision making, and they sometimes need their hand held along the way. And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Right. And you hear people complain in different industries if they're looking for a new job, and you'll hear people say, a company only wants to hire somebody who's already done that exact same job for X number of years. And people are like, well, I'm trying to change jobs because I would like a better job or a different job. And if you're only going to plug people into a spot where they're a perfect fit, where's their opportunity for growth? Or maybe, okay, they prove themselves and we'll promote them after year. But it seems like, businesses like yours, you're probably creating through growth, these opportunities for career progression for others to become leaders instead of handling the hammer directly.
That's right. Well, I'll share with you a story. As long as I've been in the construction industry, my entire adult life practically, as long as I've been in this industry, there's been a labor shortage. I can't tell you the last time there hasn't been a labor shortage. And I actually sit on something called the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University. And we put out this LIRA report. It's a leading indicator report. And guess what? There's a labor shortage. And it's so I think even in that sense, do we just hire people that know what they're doing, or do we say, hey, let's teach people, let's give people, let's not worry about a labor shortage. Let's not be held hostage to the rules created in our own mind. Let's train and develop people. Let's bring people right out of high school that don't want to go to college and teach them a path. In fact, from my own personal experience, and especially in the sales role, I've always found it much more successful to groom up a salesperson that doesn't have the experience, but they're hungry, they're trainable, they're enthusiastic, they really want to grow, versus bringing on somebody that has a whole lot of experience. One of the challenges that businesses have is when you start hiring people that have a whole lot of experience and you're bringing them all under your tent, you have a lot of colliding cultures. They bring with them the culture of the other business, and in many ways, culture is shaped by the lowest level of acceptable behavior inside of your business.
Right.
So when you start bringing all these colliding cultures, it doesn't necessarily work out so well, nor is success necessarily portable. Just because they were successful somewhere else, the conditions might have made them that, and no guarantee they're going to be successful with you.
Right. Right. And that's where, it seems like whether there's labor shortages or even without, culture can be a real competitive advantage in terms of attracting and retaining talent.
Well, let's go there. Okay, let's go there.
Yeah.
If we think about it, we were saying earlier that when you start a business, success is based on how an entrepreneur executes. When you start hiring people, success is based on how well your team executes. What determines that, right? How people think affects how they feel. How people feel affect how they act. How the team acts is how the business performs. The culture affects the mindset, how people think and feel about the business, which significantly impacts organizational performance. Culture doesn't simply make a difference. In my opinion, it's the difference maker.
Yeah, the difference.
The difference maker.
Yeah. One thing you write about, I haven't heard about before. Everyone knows the exit interview. Like I've done exit interviews, leaving jobs in the past, and some will say like, well, what you might learn from that exit interview is too late. Or why should I tell you things in the exit interview that you didn't care about when I was still an employee?
Yeah.
You talk about something called a stay interview. Tell us about that.
Right. Well, we think about an exit interview. It's really an autopsy. It's like,
right.
So let's change the dynamics of that. And where it came about from is that we were doing exit interviews like a lot of companies were, and we heard some kind of interesting nuggets of people that were leaving us and moving on to something else. And we thought, how can we be proactive with that? Well, let's do stay interviews. And the stay interviews consisted of 4 questions that we would ask people while they were still working for us. The first question is, what makes you want to come to work every day? The second question is, what would make you one day want to leave? The third question is, what is something the organization is doing wrong today? And the fourth question is, what is something that you're not getting from your manager that you think you need? And what it is, it's kind of like, if you remember in science class that you use litmus paper to test things. Well, the stay interview is like the litmus paper for the culture of your organization. You think you have a certain culture, you think you have a certain mindset amongst your team. Well, let's test that. Let's do a stay interview and see if it's real, or see if there's maybe some blind spot we need to address. Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds like, those questions are great questions. And am I right in assuming that the format would be a face-to-face discussion the way an exit interview would be, as opposed to anonymous surveys where you might ask the same questions and get maybe less specific feedback than you could get from a conversation?
Yeah, we certainly preferred it in a face-to-face environment. So look, it's a great way if you're conducting a performance review with somebody, it kind of broadens the conversation beyond KPIs and the typical metrics inside of the business, and really gets to the, to how people think and feel about the organization, because you can take that information and then use that as a coaching opportunity for both yourself as a leader, but also for the person that you're working with.
Yeah. And it just seemed like you would end up with ideas, feedback that's much more actionable than some sort of numeric score litmus test. I mean, there's lots of different ways of surveying engagement, satisfaction, but maybe that question doesn't get asked of, do you have everything you need to do your job? What can we do to support you?
Yeah.
It's almost, an organizational evaluation, not just an individual evaluation.
Right. And it should be a two-way street, right? We want to make sure that we're providing, not only putting people in the right seats, but we're also giving them the right tools to be successful. Both are very, very important.
Exactly.
Or is there another seat that they might be really aspiring to get into? Well, let's help them get there.
Yeah. So think about, performance and business growth and culture. Do you have any, kind of specific stories from your own leadership about helping people feel more safe to admit mistakes, feeling safer to ask for help, having the focus be on learning from mistakes?
Yeah. Well, again, because it's in an empowered environment, mistakes aren't punished. They're just simply, it's indecision that's frowned upon. So
Yeah.
by encouraging people to make decisions, and I'll give you an example. In the home improvement business, let's say we're doing some replacement windows for somebody, and somebody doesn't like the customer doesn't like the trim on the window, and they complain to the installer, and the installer says, I don't know what to do about it. It's in the contract. I'm sorry. And it gets escalated to their manager, and their manager says, I don't know what to tell you. It's in the contract. By the time it gets to my desk, the customer wants a new house. So what you want to do is you want to try to handle it as close to the customer as possible. And guess what? They're not always going to make the right decision. But you know what?
Yeah.
But every decision, even the wrong ones, becomes a learning opportunity or a confidence builder, one or the other.
Yeah.
But you have to create that environment and give permission for
Mhm.
mistakes to happen.
And think about coaching in the aftermath of a mistake. Somebody who was very influential on Toyota. It was influential on me and some people at General Motors, even at the early stages of my career. Dr. W. Edwards Deming, considered a quality guru, management guru. Passed away 30 years ago. But one of the things I remember really vividly, from his body of work was the idea of a leader is supposed to be a coach, not a judge. So you think of like annual performance reviews or even quarterly, like that's a judging activity. And so, well, the role of a leader is to be continually coaching somebody to help ensure their performance instead of just trying to judge it after the fact. I think that's just a key mindset difference from a lot of, again, maybe things that are being taught at business schools.
Yeah, but it's very true. You want to weave personal development, people development deep within the fabric of your organization. And by the way, one other thing that if anybody walked into my office with a problem, I responded with the same 7 words every single time. Well, what do you think? What do you think we should do? What do you think we should do? Instead of trying to feed them the answer, well, what do you think we should do? And to kind of give them permission to think.
And if you're helping people that way, if you're helping grow people and you're coaching them, I bet they react to that. What do you think we should do? Question. They're not saying, well, hey, Brian doesn't help me, so I'm never coming back to him. Well, no, that's not your intent in saying, what do you think we should do? It's all in the tone and the way it's being done. And I mean, I don't know, I ask you to role play a situation a little bit. Let's say I came to you and said, Brian, we've got this problem. You asked me, what do you think we should do? Yeah. And I say, well, I don't know. We just discovered the problem, Brian. I don't know.
Okay. So what do you think we should do?
We should probably go out and kind of make sure we understand the situation a little bit better. The quote unquote proverbial fire is out.
Sure.
So I don't know. Can we take some time to go talk to the team and we'll see what we come up with?
What a great idea. What else do you think we could do?
Yeah. Well, then, they might come back and say, well, we've got some ideas, but we're going to have to spend some money. We need some approval or support for that.
Yeah. And I think those are you talk about a healthy conversation when you have your team bringing a solution to you. I think it's great. But yeah, sometimes when you say, what do you think we should do? They say, I don't know. Sometimes you have to ask it a couple of times. Well,
sure.
Let's talk about it. What are our options? What do you think you should do? What do you think we should do?
Yeah.
And then it's kind of steering them. So it's really sometimes not about just giving them the answer, but again, helping them helping asking the right question, getting them to really think about their business. They're closest to the business. They're going to have the answers inside of them. They just need permission to speak to them. And look, even when people make mistakes, it's okay to be wrong. Just don't be wrong for long. That's kind of the other part of it, right? It's okay to be wrong. Don't be wrong for long.
Yeah. And I love that. That I love the way that rhymes, but it's okay to be wrong. And if we can acknowledge that we're being wrong on a small scale, then we won't be wrong for long.
Correct. It's getting off of, and all of us, even as leaders, sometimes we get so married to a bad decision that we go all in on it, and it's never good. So look, I've hired people and promoted people that shouldn't have been. We're going to make decisions. Some of them are not going to be correct. Don't be married to a bad decision.
Yeah. Well, and I was reading, I mean, this is recent corporate history. There's a couple of books that have been written about what I'll call the old GE, as that company has changed and evolved and spun off and has different leadership now. But going back to the Jack Welch era, the Jeffrey Immelt era, there's just story after story in a couple of these books of, the scenario being Jeff Immelt wanted to buy some business, and a lot of people thought it was a really bad idea. But the culture was one of like, oh, that's Jeff's pet project. No, you don't challenge Jeff. And then, so people have learned, they learn to keep quiet. They're conditioned by Jeff for the company and the culture. And then the deal's a dud. And then, Jeff Immelt would say, well, if you people were opposed to this, you should have spoken up. And I'm like, well, come on. Like that.
Yeah.
Do you not realize it's just kind of mind boggling to me that somebody with all the formal education and experience and a CEO of one of the world's most important companies seemingly didn't see those connections. You've bullied people into keeping quiet. That's a leadership problem, not a people problem.
Yeah, it's one of the pillars in the book is that leaders are aware of the echo of their voice. Mm-hmm. And even though, because if you come across a certain way, people are going to determine what type of day you have based on the type of the day that the leader has. And if you come across angry or pissed off or stressed out, people aren't going to approach you on things. Or if they think you're closed-minded in the example you just presented, people aren't going to tell you the truth. And it's not always about what we say. It's sometimes just in how we act. You think about the manager that's sitting in a meeting or the leader that's sitting in a meeting with hearing new information. And once they get it, they're playing on their phone and they're checking emails. And it's the leader's responsibility, because that has a big echo to stay present, not until you get it, but until the last person in the room gets it. All of those things really make up leadership that, to your point, aren't necessarily taught in universities, but they're super key to building a great team.
Yeah. And, leadership makes such a difference. I've been a big fan for a long time, even going back to following his previous company. But, Larry Culp hired in as the first outsider CEO of GE in their 120 plus year history. I saw him speak at a big lean manufacturing conference in late 2022, where he was talking about the need to shift the culture. And it starts with him and how he was encouraging people to bring bad news forward faster.
Yeah.
And that he and other leaders had to react well when people brought bad news forward. So trying to retrain people, it's not going to be, as he put it, a shoot the messenger culture anymore. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's equally important when we're trying to find the root cause of a problem, right? Because people get very defensive. And the idea of separating people from process. Yeah, I think it's important that, hey, we have the right people. Let's talk about where our process is broken that created this situation. And really focusing people on that, because you're right, people get very defensive. It wasn't my fault, it was their fault. Well, it's not about fault, it's about where's the process broken.
Yeah, and if people aren't being blamed or punished, then there's less need. I mean, maybe there's always some human need on a psychological level, to deflect. You're going to feel bad if something was your fault. But more often these are systemic problems. People are involved in, as opposed to it being their fault. And the more we can do to focus on learning and not hitting the guardrail the next time, I think the better off everyone is individually, the better off the business is.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. And it does require reminding people that often and always that look, we're in the we're to coin an old phrase from COVID, we're in this together, kind of, but really we are, as an organization. It's a team. They're not employees. It's a team. And how do you move the team forward?
Yeah. So one other thing I was going to ask you before we wrap up, Brian, kind of thinking of a connection to Jack Welch. And one of the things he said that maybe made, I think, good sense was, as you write about, kind of a 2x2 matrix. Business schools love 2x2 matrices also, but thinking of individual performance and culture fit.
Right.
And Jack Welch says, in his retirement before he passed, he was talking about how companies need to sometimes make the tough decision of you've got a high performer in sales or some area, but they're culturally toxic. This happens sometimes hospitals, top surgeon in an operating room, world-class clinical performance, but no one likes working with them. So I don't know if he always lived by that, but I think it was a good thing to, encourage leaders to think about. What's your view of a matrix of how do you try to coach somebody who's scores well on the performance axis, but not on the culture axis?
Yeah. Well, first of all, they can't be ignored. Okay. And I look, an organization needs alignment. And there's a philosophy out there that you take the high performer, low culture fit, and you isolate them so you get the benefit of their performance without ruining the rest of the team.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good idea to start isolating people inside of your organization when you're chasing alignment. But on the other side of the quadrant, you have the high culture fit, low performer, the person you absolutely love but isn't hitting their targets. You coach a high culture fit, low performer using short, measurable KPIs. You coach the high performer, low culture fit using alignment to the mission and vision statement of your business. It's about behaviors. Hey, you're hitting all your numbers, but here's where your performance might be lacking. So here's where your behaviors might be lacking. Let's talk about some activities and actions that can really help move that past where we are today.
Yeah. And I imagine there were times, as hard as you might have tried or wanted things to work out, the coaching isn't effective and you have to choose to exit somebody from the business.
You sometimes you just have to give people an opportunity to be successful somewhere else. It's not the perfect choice, but it is for the business. It is for the business, because to tolerate inconsistency and chaos and all of these sorts of things will just eventually bring the entire business down, because what it does is it actually normalizes it. And when you normalize that kind of behavior, congratulations, you've now set a new culture for your business, one that tolerates these sorts of things. That's not the type of culture I ever want to have in an organization.
Right. Well, our guest today, again, Brian Gottlieb. The book available now is Beyond the Hammer, A Fresh Approach to Leadership, Culture, and Building High-Performance Teams. Yes, a fresh approach indeed. And I'm excited to read the book, and I hope others will go check it out. It sounds like it's going to help a lot of people, as your lessons and stories today, Brian, have helped me, and I know helped others too.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on your show. Very much appreciated. The book is available print, audio, and ebook. I think you'll find it both engaging and actionable. So I think both of those things are really awesome about it.
Did you read the audiobook or hire someone to do that? I'm always
interesting story about that. So the book is in two sections, right? The first section is a parable. It's a story of a contractor that's struggling, misalignment, all the things we talked about. And the second half is very actionable, because the first half has characters in it. I didn't feel comfortable reading a parable. I read the second half, but I collaborated with my favorite narrator of all time. His name is Eduardo Ballerini. He does.
Is he a rock star in Audiobook?
Oh gosh, yeah. So he read the parable and just brings these characters to life. It is such a great listen. It's really terrific. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that turned out well. So it sounds like the right approach for a fresh book on these topics. So Brian, and for the listener, I'll make sure there are links in the show notes to all of that, the book, website, and more. So Brian, thanks again. This has been great.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks.